So we've been making some progress with our app. We have 4 different scenes, each representing a top app, movie, song, or album, and the titles will change based on um, which view we're looking at. But while that's good, it would be better if it actually showed the title of whatever the top app or movie was. So we're going to look at actually how to get that data from the internet so that our app will always be requesting it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to my browser, and I've opened up the page www.apple.com/RSS. And again, RSS stands for Really Simple Syndication. And these are feeds that you can subscribe to that software can use the information contained in those feeds to automatically update data for you. Well, let's go ahead and look at the top 10 songs league. Click on that, and you can see it's a lot of data. And this data is in the format of XML. And XML is just a simple way to organize and categorize data. If you've ever had any experience with HTML, you could notice it looks a little bit similar, but these tags are specific to the application. So I've got an ID, I've got a title, I've got updated, and again, different programs like readers can interpret this information, search this information, and display the data. So if I look through here, I can see that I've got some information. Let's see here, do we have any titles? I've got some images here, links to images. I've got names and so on. So XML is one way to look at this data. Another format is JSON, which is JavaScript Object Notation. So I'm going to change the end of this to JSON, and I'm going to limit this to 1. This is going to be one song output. So let's enter that. And you can see that JSON looks a little bit different, but the information is the same. And if you've done anything with dictionaries, you see that I have key value pairs. And you can see my first key is feed, and the value of it is another dictionary. I've got a key and another dictionary. So you can see I can nest dictionaries within dictionaries within dictionaries. And this is actually a very confusing way to look at this. So what I find helps sometimes, if I take this and I go to a JSON formatter, I like this one, and if I paste that JSON in there and process, it breaks it down. And so I can collapse this. So I can see that feed is my top level key. But within feed, I've got author, entry, updated, rights, title, icon, and so on. So you can see this actually helps me visualize the information a little better. I know that for the author, I have a name and a URL. For updated, I just have the key as label, and here's the value for when it was last updated. So these JSON validators can help you see the information a little bit better. So let's go ahead and go back to Xcode, and let's update our top media controller so that we can get that information from Apple's websites and interpret it and display it a little bit. So I'm going to open up my top media controller. And this is one of those things we're going to write a lot of code, and some of it you're just going to have to take on faith that it works. So I'm going to, let's get rid of this for right now. I'm going to add that back in later. So under superviewed load, I'm going to let feed URL equal, and then ax.i2. Actually, let's go back here. Let's just go back to this website, take this, and copy it. So I don't have to type all that in, and paste it. Should be good. So that's my feed URL. Now normally if I wanted to look this up, I could just type this information into my browser and the page would appear. If I'm doing it from within an app, I actually have to make a request to get that information. So I'm going to create a variable called request, and it's going to equal something of type NSURL request, and the URL is NSURL, and it is my string feed URL. And okay, so let's look at this for a second. I'm going to make a request, and which URL am I going to use? Well, I'm going to convert my raw URL to an NS URL, which is something that Apple understands, and I'm going to unwrap it, okay, force unwrap it to make sure there's data there. So far this isn't too bad. I have a URL I want to visit, and I have to make a request to get that URL. So here's where it gets a little bit sticky. I'm going to do an NS URL connection, and I'm going to send an asynchronous request. We'll have more about asynchronous requests in a second, but essentially think of an asynchronous request as something that's happening in the background. It's a little more complicated than that, but we'll talk about that in a second. So notice the first thing it needs is a request, so I'm going to pass it the request I just created. The queue, actually let me do this, let me hit enter. The queue is going to be an NS operation queue, and it's going to be a main queue. And I'm going to end the parentheses after that. Let me get rid of this part. And after I do that, I'm going to use what's called a closure. And think of a closure as just a function calling something within another function. So let's go ahead and we'll have a little presentation on that in a few minutes. But notice I'm going to do a new set of brackets, and the closure is going to take some data. It's going to take a response. It's going to give me back some data and an error in. One of the ways you can recognize a closure is if you see this in. Okay? Let me just make sure I've got all that so far. Okay. So I'm going to say if let JSON data. So that's the information I'm getting back. Equals the data that's returned. The feed equals try. And again, try is a way to attempt something. And if it doesn't work, your program won't crash. NS-JSON serialization, JSON object with data. And the data is the JSON data I defined up above. And the options, mutable containers, as NS dictionary. If that works, the title equals the feed, so information I get back from the feed, and then value for key path. So if you go back here for a second, remember this JSON formatter? I want to pull certain information. I want to know about what the name of the song is. And so in order to do that, I need to know the path to get that piece of information. Well, it's going to be feed, then entry, name, and label. So that's what I'm going to try to get back. So let's go, let me go back to my Xcode. And that's what this value for key path is. So it's going to be feed dot entry dot im name dot label, and again that was the path. Whoops. As a string. I want to return that data as a string. And then I'm going to say the artist equals feed dot value for key path, and it's feed dot entry dot im, and it's artist this time dot label as string. And then when that's done, I'm going to say self.titleLabel.text equals the title I just created, and self.artistLabel.text equals artist. Oh, not artist label. Okay, I think I've got all that done. Get rid of these two pieces. But it says I still have an error somewhere. Let me just make sure I typed all this in right. So it looks like I still have an error here. And as I look through, I should not have a comma after this. So I'm going to go ahead and delete that comma out, put a space in. That should take care of my error. And so there's a whole lot going on in here. The important thing to remember is that I'm sending an asynchronous request. And an asynchronous request is something that happens in the background. And while that's happening in the background, notice I have another set of brackets here. That's called a closure. And in this closure, I'm getting a response, I'm getting some data, and it's coming back from this asynchronous request. This is information that's coming back. And I'm creating a variable called JSON data that's equal to this data coming back. And you notice this is optional binding, the if let. And so it's saying if something comes back from this request, set the feed equal to the information that comes back as a dictionary. So essentially I'm getting all this information back in dictionary form, in JSON form. That's why you get this as dictionary. And it's trying to make sense of this JSON object. And then I'm trying to find the title by navigating down through this path to get the title information. And then type this out here just to make it a little bit neater. And I'm setting the artist. So let's go ahead and look back at this. So you can see in the entry, I've got the name. This is the song title, and you can see the path was feed entry I am name label. And then if I keep scrolling down, I see the title label. So if I go back, you can see I'm going the name and the artist and getting those informations as strings and assigning that string value to my two labels. So that's a lot that's going on there. So let's go ahead and run this. Yep, let's stop that. Everyone going still. So notice that you can see the little flicker where the song title and the artist title came up, but it changes to 7 Years by Lucas Graham, which is the top song on iTunes right now. If it changes in an hour or tomorrow and I run my app again, this will be different because this data is real time. It's always changing. Let's go back to here. And so anytime I want to get data, I can use or data from online, from the internet somewhere, I can use an NSURL request to get that. And this connection does it asynchronously. And that means that normally what happens when you're running a program is it does one line, waits for it to finish, and does the next line. If a function is called, it calls that function, waits for that function to finish running, and then goes to the next one. If, however, something takes a long time, your app might stall. And that's why I do an asynchronous request, because what happens when I do that is it spawns a separate thread. So that asynchronous request runs simultaneously to the rest of your app running, so it doesn't just hold up for a long time and not do anything, which would not be good for the user. So this app gets information in the background and then updates those labels. So it looks like this current song title is pretty short. I think it was 7 weeks, which is fine because our label fits. But there may be song titles or app titles or movie titles that are really, really long. So let's see what happens when we have let's go ahead and hard code in a value this could be a very long song title, remix. Let's go ahead and see what that looks like on the screen. And you can see it doesn't really fit quite right on the screen. It kind of overlaps, which is not a very good user interface. So we want to fix that. So we are going to, let's go ahead and go to my main storyboard, the interface builder. I'm going to select the top song scene. And I'm going to go down to the title label, which is here. And notice the attributes inspector comes up. So in the attributes inspector, I see there's an auto shrink field. I'm going to change auto shrink to minimum font size, and I'm going to make it 10. So if my title gets too big, it will shrink it so that it will fit on the screen. So in order for that to work, I have to add width constraints to my title label. So again, I'm going to select the title label for my top song scene, and I'm going to drag it over to the left or the right boundary, and then I'm going to drag it to the left boundary. And I'm going to add constraints here, leading space, and I'm going to do it here, trailing space. So I've added constraints, and now that label is going to, anything will fit within that label. So let's go ahead and run that to make sure it works. Now notice that the label shrinks to fit within the screen, and it stays within the boundaries, and it looks much, much better. So what I need to do is I need to go ahead and repeat that for all my other labels, for all my other different views. So I'm going to go ahead and do that very quickly. So on my top album scene, I'm going to go down to my title label, auto shrink, minimum font size, make it 10. And then I'm going to, let me undo that. Make sure I grab that. Add my constraints, leading space, trailing space. All right, let's do the same for top movie scene. Oh, that's right. Make sure I got to select my title label, minimum font size, 10. Drag that over. Drag that over. Control leading space. Control trailing space. Okay, almost done. One more, the top app, view, title label, minimum font size, 10. Let me drag this over here. And then I'm going to drag this over here. Control drag, trailing space, control drag, leading space, and that should be it. We've seen that it's smaller, but we did notice that. Let's go ahead and run it one more time and see. That when it first starts, it happens quickly, but let's watch what happens to the labels when it first starts. We didn't notice it this time, but when the app first starts up, you see the song title and artist, and then it changes very fast. That's because that information is being retrieved, and it looks kind of jumpy. We really don't like that. So we again, those they're updated during that completion handler. Once I'm going to go back to our this is as part of our closure, our completion handler down here. This is when those labels are getting updated, and it might take a second for the information to come back. So it'll be nice if they didn't jump like that. So what we're going to do is we are going to go back. We're going to do one more thing. Let's go back to our album scene. We're going to make our labels hidden first. So I'm going to go to title label, scroll down and make it hidden, and then artist label, I'm going to make it hidden, and notice that they kind of fade out a little bit. I'm going to do the same for song. I'm going to go to title label, hidden, artist label, hidden. So when the app first starts, I will not see any of these labels, and we'll see how we can fix that in a second. I'm hiding all of these text labels, so initially when the app first starts, they will not show up. I'm going here to view, my title label, hidden, artist label, hidden. Okay, now I'm just going to update my media controller, and what I'm going to do is before I show my title label, I'm going to do self.title. Oops, let me do this. Let me do it. Take care of that. After the text is set, let me do self.title label.hidden equals false. So once the text is set, I'll unhide that label. So I'll never see that blip. It'll just all of a sudden appear with the correct text in it. Self.artistlabel.hidden equals false. Oh, and let's go ahead and set this back to title. Okay, so now everything should work correctly. Let's go ahead and run this. And you'll notice that we shouldn't get any kind of jump on our text when our app first starts up, which will look a little bit nicer. Okay, so there we go. We've got, but notice it still all says the same thing. It's all the same song. So we need to find a way to differentiate this data. But you notice there wasn't any kind of jump when we saw the text. So we still have a little bit more to do before our app is fully functional. So we'll start working on that next time.